Today, we're going to dive into one of the most famous and, frankly, most misunderstood ideas in all of psychology. But here's the thing. Our story doesn't start in some fancy university lab. Nope, it starts with one of the weirdest true crime stories you will ever hear.
So to really get a handle on the Dunning-Kruger effect, you got to go back to Pittsburgh in 1995. And this isn't just some fun little backstory. The truly bizarre tale of a man named MacArthur Wheeler is literally the reason this whole theory even exists.
I mean, can you imagine? Those were the actual words MacArthur Wheeler said when the police finally caught him and showed him the security camera tapes of his own bank robberies. He was just completely baffled, genuinely shocked. And the reason why he was so shocked is the key to this whole thing.
Okay, so here's how it went down. On January 6, 1995, Wheeler and a buddy robbed not one, but two banks in the middle of the day. And they didn't wear masks, no disguises, nothing. Why? Because, and you are not going to believe this, Wheeler was absolutely convinced that if he smeared lemon juice all over his face, he'd be invisible to security cameras. Yeah, like how lemon juice works as invisible ink. The police, well, they had no problem at all seeing him on the tapes, and he was arrested less than an hour after his face was plastered all over the local news.
Now, here's what's so wild. Wheeler wasn't just winging it, or at least he thought he wasn't. He told the cops that he had actually tested his lemon juice theory. He'd taken a Polaroid of himself, and when the picture came out with no face in it, he was like, "See, it works." The police figured he must have just messed up the shot or used some bad film. But for MacArthur Wheeler, that blank photo was all the proof he needed.
Well, this absolutely bonkers story eventually makes its way to a social psychologist at Cornell University, a guy named David Dunning. And he saw something much deeper in Wheeler's crazy confidence. This wasn't just a robbery gone wrong, it was a total failure of self-awareness. It got him thinking, what if the very incompetence that made Wheeler a terrible criminal also made him completely unable to see that he was a terrible criminal?
And that brilliant question led straight to the famous 1999 paper he wrote with his graduate student Justin Kruger. This is where they laid out the Dunning-Kruger effect. The basic idea is this. When it comes to a certain skill, the people with the lowest ability don't just mess up. They also don't have the mental tools to even realize they're messing up. To put it really simply, they're so bad at something, they can't see how bad they are.
Dunning and Kruger called this the dual burden, and it's a real double whammy. It's why someone who's, just awful at public speaking might walk off stage thinking, man, I killed it. First, their lack of skill leads to a bad performance. And second, that exact same lack of skill keeps them from recognizing it. So you're left, just like MacArthur Wheeler, thinking you're doing great. What's also fascinating is that they found the reverse is often true for experts, who tend to slightly underestimate their skills because they assume everyone else finds it easy too.
And look, this pattern has shown up again and again in all sorts of fields, even across different cultures. This chart right here, from a 2020 study, shows that classic curve perfectly. You see the folks on the left, the bottom performers, their own estimate of how they did is way, way higher than their actual score. Then look to the right, the top performers actually guess a little lower than they really scored. For decades, this was pretty much gospel in psychology. But what if the whole thing is wrong?
Because, in the last few years, a huge challenge has popped up. And it's not coming from other psychologists, it's coming from mathematicians and statisticians. And they're starting to suggest that maybe this whole thing is just an illusion.
They're asking this really fundamental question. Is this iconic graph actually showing us a glitch in our brains? Or is it possible that the Dunning-Kruger effect is just a ghost in the data, an illusion cooked up by the way we run the numbers?
So the main argument from these critics is that the effect is what's called a statistical artifact. All that means is that the pattern we see isn't really caused by human psychology, but it's just something that's bound to happen because of the math involved. In fact, they say you can create that exact same famous graph without any people at all.
And this is where it gets really mind-bending. Researchers ran a computer simulation. They just created a bunch of random data points. Each one got a random actual score and a random self-assessed score. There's no psychology here, no confidence, no incompetence, just random noise. And when they plotted the results, boom, there it is, the exact same pattern. The quote-unquote bottom 25% on the left look like they're massively overconfident, and the top 25% on the right look like they're underconfident. A perfect Dunning-Kruger curve made from absolutely nothing.
So the big takeaway here is that the effect seems to emerge from statistical noise. Dr. Patrick McKnight, who is a psychologist that used to teach the Dunning-Kruger effect, is now one of its biggest critics.
He points out that the effect in these simulations actually gets stronger the more randomness you add. And as he says right here, that is the exact opposite of how a real scientific discovery is supposed to work.
Okay, so this leaves us right in the middle of a really juicy scientific debate. Is one of psychology's most famous ideas a real feature of our brains, or is it just a trick of the numbers? Let's break down the two sides. So on one side, you've got the classic view. Unskilled people are doubly cursed. They just can't see their own mistakes. And on the other side, you've got the new statistical argument, that the pattern is mostly just caused by two things. One, random noise, and two, a totally different bias called the better-than-average effect.
So what is that effect? Oh, it's something we all kind of do. It's our natural human tendency to think we're just a little bit better than the average person. The most famous example found that 93% of American drivers said they were better than average, which, is mathematically impossible. The critics say that this general human optimism, when you mix it with some statistical noise, is really all you need to create the Dunning-Kruger curve.
So, where does all this leave us? I mean, whether it's a real bias in our brains or just a quirk of statistics, this whole story still has a really powerful lesson for us about how we see ourselves. So, let's talk about what we can actually take away from all this.
A really good way to get a grip on this is to put it side by side with something you've probably heard of, imposter syndrome. They're like two sides of the same self-perception coin. The Dunning-Kruger effect is all about a lack of self-awareness. Someone just can't see their own weaknesses. Imposter syndrome is the opposite. It's almost an excess of self-awareness, where successful people feel like fakes and doubt their own skills, even when all the evidence says they're great.
David Dunning himself has said that the point of his work was never to give people a weapon to call other people stupid. The real lesson here is for us. The whole story, from the lemon juice robber to this deep statistical debate, it just shines a huge spotlight on how incredibly hard it is for any of us to judge ourselves accurately. It's a pretty powerful reminder to stay humble and, maybe listen when people give you feedback.
And in the end, that leaves us with an even bigger question, doesn't it? The strange case of the Dunning-Kruger effect began with a guy who couldn't see his own incompetence. But the debate it kicked off forces all of us to wonder if we're any better at seeing the statistical illusions and tricks that might be shaping how we see the world. And that is a puzzle really worth thinking about.